hey doc, take a listen to these. Sent him over 5 or 6 phone calls. He's like, what? I can't believe she's doing that. I'm like, I know you were mad at us, but it's really Susan. And then they're like, well, what am I supposed to do about it? And I'm like, I'll teach her how to do it. All right, we are live, and I am excited about today's guest. But before we jump into that, do me a favor, subscribe to our podcast. It takes less than a second, and I know you're ignoring me, and all you have to do is hit that little button, but it helps me out like literally so much. So everything here is free, money back guarantee. If you hit that button and you're disappointed, full refund. So do that for me. I know you're not listening. I know that you're just tuning this out. So please, please, please just go do that for me. And I got my friend Josh here. Josh, it's good to have you on today. Why don't you share with our audience a little bit about your agency and what you've been up to?
Sure. Would love to, Gary. Yeah, stoked to be here as well. So we started 10 years ago, which is nuts. Time has flown. And we became a HubSpot partner 8 years ago. So most of our business has evolved in the same way that the HubSpot product has evolved. So we started in inbound marketing and strictly inbound marketing, creating content, writing blogs, email nurturing, all that good stuff. And now have evolved into more just strictly sales and helping companies build out their sales departments.
Which is crazy, right? So that's like a crazy pivot. So how did that come about? How did you make that pivot?
Great question. Really, I feel like I was born a salesperson, and I just studied marketing because I loved it and frankly wanted to learn how to draw my own leads, and figured out, oh, wow, people will pay me for this. And then that turned into agency life and everything else. But there's one pivotal moment. I remember we were at an inbound conference, which is HubSpot's annual big conference they do. And the CMO at the time, named Mike Volpe, he and I were going for a walk together. And he was like, hey, man, you guys are really great at sales. You put out a ton of great sales content. We're launching a CRM in 2 years. Start becoming the sales agency. Believe me, it'll pay off. So that was pretty helpful in that direction. And then in 2016, I wrote a book called A Closing Culture, which is all about combining marketing and sales and how to make it more of a growth department.
I love that. And most people don't think of it that way, right? Usually like marketing and sales, as companies grow, they become like these competitive rivals of, no, it's marketing's fault. No, it's sales' fault. We sent the leads, and no, you didn't send the leads. They were trash leads. They're horrible. They don't want to buy anything. And so it's like a competition, but I like the way that you just described that it's a growth machine. And that's how we have it structured, is business development. It's all one thing, building relationships, marketing, and getting the clients sold into becoming a client. And so we're trying to build that out now. So I'm super curious from just even for me, how do you picture those things working together and having that cog be one thing rather than two competing things?
Great question. Really, there's a whole bunch on sales enablement and alignment and all this stuff. But really, if you want to drill it all down, it comes down to a couple key metrics. One of them is your marketing team being measured on revenue. So revenue, like true revenue attribution. So just like we've been trained in marketing for years, how to build kind of the backwards funnel and estimate the conversion rates all the way up to how many website visitors do we need. Well, doing that all the way through to revenue and then putting a price tag so you can say like, okay, we could probably pay blank amount per website visitor or blank amount per MQL, or I heard a new one today, MQA, marketing qualified account, depending on, if you're doing B2B sales or what type of sales you're doing. But yeah, if you can attribute that, it helps provide so much more clarity and even helps the sales team value the leads a lot more, because as the leads are coming through, they know, hey, this is how much revenue is tied to that lead, and this is how much that lead may have costed our company in marketing spend.
So are you looking at lifetime value basically? So is it just 1 year, or like
great question? I would say annual contract value is a great place to start. If you really want to go to lifetime value, fantastic. You're already way ahead of the curve.
Start slapping people around like, you just lost us $4 million by not responding to that email.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is then if you're going to go lifetime value, then you have to factor in customer success, and you have to do the exact same equations with how good is our sales to success handoff? How good is our onboarding? How good is, our upsells and our renewals? And that's where it can get a little sticky. So I would say focusing on, what is a salesperson booking as average contract value? And then, you're probably, depending on what type of business you're in, that may be a couple different buckets. You might have like an enterprise bucket or a mid-market bucket or an SMB bucket. These are all B2B terms. If you're doing more, if you're going straight to consumer, then obviously you may have a easier way of calculating that because the average customer spends blank versus the average business with us spends a different amount.
Yeah, B2B. I think B2C is much easier just from the standpoint of there's one decision maker, right? So if I sell burritos, it's like, I'm marketing you a burrito. Are you hungry? And you're like, yeah, I'm hungry. I'm like, cool. There's nothing else I have to overcome, right? Like it's $8 for my burrito.
Yeah.
When you're doing business, it's like, hey, do we align culturally? Hey, when does your budgets reset for your company? Hey, when does you're the decision maker, but you also need finance to sign off on it, or you're not the decision maker, but the decision maker isn't going to come to the table until we get everything aligned, right? Like, and there's nothing that you can say to get them to come until we get so far into the process. And so there's all these things that come into it that make B2B tricky. Then the other thing that's tricky for us is, so we do these events, we do all these educational pieces, we do podcasts, we do webinars, and it's really hard to tell where anything's coming from, right? Like it's almost impossible because they may have come through the podcast, but it wasn't really the podcast that really got them in. It was all this other stuff that we were doing and connections that we're making with people, and we have a lot of connections. So how would you flesh that out from a trackability standpoint?
Great question. For us, it's ultimately, I'd say, from a technology standpoint, it's why we adopted a platform like HubSpot and now are so grateful that it does even more full cycle, because you can really narrow in, because we have the CRM tied to these things. As a marketer, I can click in and see how many of these deals did close. I don't have to go to a separate CRM or another tool that's one step away. But really, to simplify it even more, it goes back to the alignment. Because if you have true alignment where the sales team knows that their feedback is being directly implemented into the new strategies, they're going to make sure that feedback is that much better. And they're going to make sure that marketing knows, hey, guess what? Another deal came through from the podcast and I put those notes in and you got those notes correct. Or, this is where, and even getting into sales notes, you get into this thing called structured data or unstructured, meaning is it all just in one doc where you have to expect every marketer to read every single doc that comes across, which is not realistic? Or do you have a system where there's a clear drop down that's being selected of, hey, these are all the 5 or 6 things that we're doing. So sales, just select one of those 5 or 6 things or click the other box, which tells us to add another one that maybe we're missing. To those. And then that gives us good feedback later. We can do a quick pie chart of, hey, where did our deals come in last quarter? Oh, wow, we've gotten a lot more in podcasts. Let's invest even more in podcasts next quarter.
Yeah. And then what about for companies that are, and this is all great stuff, so this is really helpful to me, and I'm also thinking about some of our other listeners as well. Someone who's like, hey, I'm the founder. I got maybe 10 people on my team. I do all the sales. How do you work with them, or how would you help them and direct them?
Ooh, good question. First and foremost, I would say it comes down to making sure that you have something that is replicatable, meaning you're documenting your own process. A lot of us founders, we're just doing it. We're visionaries. We're making up as we go. Half of it's in our head, and we're like, okay, whatever. I don't have time to even write this down. Or every deal is different. I hear that all the time. Well, every deal is different, Josh. And when you take a step back, it's like, well, there's really 2 or 3 categories of deals that are very, 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 very similar, or there's really just everything has to follow. So one recommendation I would make is there's a book called Baseline Selling that really kind of helped unlock a lot of thinking for me. And I'm rolling out actually a course. I'm in the process of rolling out a new course, which is titled How to Close More Deals. And it's supposed to answer this exact question, but to give it away a little bit is every deal really goes through the same 4 stages, just like in a baseball field. Every time you score, even if you hit a home run, you have to touch all 4 plates to score. So that may happen in one day. That may happen over the course of 9 months, depending on your sales cycle, what you're selling, the complexity, who needs to be involved, all that good stuff. But being able to track it from that standpoint alone is going to be super helpful. So I'd say take your sales process, break it down into what happens when I connect with the buyer, what happens when I explore with them and I find out like their true pain points or true needs, what happens when I'm advising them on the right plan, and then do I have a good system in running home and closing that deal with whatever, proposal or contract, or a new fund one I'm using is Activation Link. So I don't have to even say the word contract or proposal. So that's a good one that you can feel free to replicate.
That's awesome. I love that. And that's a really good process. Like just that, if you're going to get anything from this, connecting, exploring with them, then you're going to, now that I understand where you're at, now I can advise you a little bit. And then how do I close them? And then that book was Baseline Selling. I'm going to get that one and definitely listen to that. Now, as you've built your agency and you've moved from more of a marketing agency and then morphed into a sales agency, which is awesome because you actually understand the struggle of both departments, right? You understand that natural tug and pull that you're going to have no matter what. And you've lived in both sides of it now. I'm sure that wasn't easy to transition a company to do that. So could you walk me through a little bit of what that felt like? Like, first of all, how did you know that this is the direction that we want to go? Was it just as easy as someone was like, from HubSpot was like, you need to do this? Or was there how did you get through that process? And then what were the hard parts and where are you at with that?
Cool. Yeah, I love it. One of the most, typically pain causes change, right? It's like we typically don't start working out until we're like, oh my gosh, my back. And then you're like, I should really be doing something more physical so I don't have back pain or whatever else. So our pain that we felt was we tripled inbound leads for this company in a very specific, very difficult enterprise sales, super complicated sales process. And we were able to do it. We got them on the first page for some crazy keywords, and they're still ranked. Some of the articles we wrote almost 6 years ago are still ranked because it was just really good content and everything. And after tripling their leads, they canceled with us. And I was just beyond myself. I was like, I don't get it. Why? Like, we're about to start going into the golden years with you as a client. Like, why are you canceling now? And they're like, well, we're just not closing any of this business. And I'm going, what do you mean? You look in HubSpot and I can see these leads, like this guy. They've been on over 100 of your pages. Like, they've visited your website 20 times. Like, and they're like, well, yeah, but we're just having trouble closing them. So that's when the light bulb went off where I was like, okay, if we keep this up, we are too far from revenue to impact real change. And so that's when we started rolling out sales training. That's when we started coining the term sales enablement, right when it was starting to come on the scene. And that's really the biggest one that probably impacted us in that way, where we're like, okay, we need to be able to help companies all the way through to closing the deal, because that's really where their mind is at. And we had already been selling our marketing services as revenue generation services and a revenue generation plan, not marketing services, which I think was a really key change in our growth of our business. We started charging a lot more than our competitors and still winning the bids. And so that was kind of the next evolution for us was, okay, that's where the company is at. That's what these people are truly buying when they're buying marketing services, is they're trying to buy new revenue impact. So how do we help change that and then work backwards to marketing?
Yeah, I think that the same thing happened for us. So we would drive leads in. So it would work for one person and not the other, and I couldn't understand why. So like literally what I did is I started listening to, I said, record every call at their office. And I started going through and listening to every single call. And I was like, oh, she stinks on the phone. That's why I'm not winning as an entrepreneur, is because Susan literally stinks on the phone. Hey, doc, take a listen to these. Sent him over 5 or 6 phone calls. He's like, what? I can't believe she's doing that. I'm like, I know you were mad at us, but it's really Susan. And then they're like, well, what am I supposed to do about it? And I'm like, I'll teach her how to do it. Right. And so it's like, now we're teaching them and now we're holding. And I said, once I teach them how to answer the phone, then it's going to be easy, right? Like then I don't have to do anything. It's just the leads are going to come in wrong. Not only do we have to track it, we have to measure it, teach the office how to hold people accountable. And then from there, then we started to realize, oh, even after we fix that, there's like 400 other holes. Did the patient actually show up? Did the patient buy treatment? Why didn't they buy treatment? How long do they wait in the waiting room? Did they schedule their next appointment? And so we started to measure all of that, and it's just like, it's this never ending cycle. But that makes you different as a company. I think there's an advantage positioning ourselves as a marketing company, because marketing, no one's ever bored with marketing. Yeah. Everybody's always willing to have a conversation. If I said, hey, I got this new marketing thing and I think you would blow up your company, everybody's like, yeah, I'll listen to that. If you say, hey, I got an operational platform that, you know what I mean? People are like, I don't know, maybe I might listen to it. So I think positioning as a marketing company is really good, because we can always get our foot in the door, but the operational side is what really makes us special, or separates us from really everybody else. And I find it fascinating that you had the same journey. So when you took that dive, okay, this client said, hey, we're going to fire you. Then you dove off into the cliff and said, okay, well, we're going to become more of a sales company. Walk me through that journey.
We wrote a book. So I was 26. And so I'm going, okay, I'm already, immediately when I walk in the room, I mean, there's pros and cons with being the marketing guy and being young, right? The pros are, they're like, oh, the new kid knows all the stuff, right? They know the tech, they understand it, which is true. I would agree with that. But in some cases, if they have a proven track record, they know it. Let's put it that way. But also when I started to talk about the sales side, that's when it would be like, our years of experience, Josh. And it was kind of like this, hey, why don't you just sit back and keep sending us leads kind of a thing. So I was like, you know what? I need something that can validate the fact that I do know what I'm talking about here. That is third party, that I can leave behind. They can go through it themselves. And then basically it'll gain me back that respect, where they're actually going to believe what I say and implement it. And so for us, at first that was a book. I've now realized I've launched one course in the last 6 months, and I've realized that the course has had a similar impact, where now it's like, well, wow, if you built a course around this, you definitely know what you're talking about. So whether it's a book or a course, or just building out a whole framework, case studies do a good job, but at this point, everybody can kind of BS a case study. And so it's like something like that is super helpful. I know it's a huge time commitment, and it was for us too, but it was definitely worth it.
Yeah, definitely. And then now you're fully on the sales side, right? Is that, or 90% or so?
Yes. Yep. To the point that we've actually, all of our previous competitors, we lined up now as referral partners.
Partners. So, that's so smart.
Yeah.
That's 100%.
Awesome. Because we kept seeing it too, where it was something where the same resources that we were outsourcing to. So at the height of our agency, we had 10 FTEs and 50 contractors. And those contractors that we were finding on Upwork and using all these other tools, next thing you know, our clients are doing the exact same thing. They're finding the contractors, and sometimes they're even contacting some of the same guys that we're using. And so we were like, man, this is becoming more and more commoditized. How do we focus more on the strategy, which is what people ultimately trust us for, is the planning, the strategy, and the accountability that we're providing, because we're so transparent with everything. How do we focus on providing that, where we can back out a little bit more of writing the actual blog post for people? Or because whether it's design or blog posts or whatever, people always have so many opinions on voice and feel and whatever. Doesn't matter how many leads it's generating.
It's always subjective too. It's always subjective. Like
so subjective.
It has the worst looking might be the best performing, and the best performing might vice versa. So it's so subjective, and so that's really good and really smart that you did that. Now, this is all really, really cool. So I didn't know a lot of this story until we started talking through it.
Yeah.
Tell me about some of like the bad parts. Tell me about the rough parts.
So the rough parts were, one, we got to a place of burnout. So my wife and I say we, at the leadership level. So I started the agency 6 months into starting it. I got married, and we lived in a shack. I mean, I'm not even kidding. There's a blog post somewhere out there with a picture of, it's like a shed, lofted one story, a quote unquote tiny home. Yeah, it was not not something I would suggest. Early marriage, there's only one door you could slam, and that was the front door. So if it came down to it, one of us would go and sit in the car and cool off, and then come back. But great for getting through some of those initial challenges, but and for motivating us to get out of the shed. But anyway, long story short, my wife joined me as the COO, and really just like we went full at it for 6 years straight. And after those 6 years, we just got burnt out. And so we had started using a document automation company called PandaDoc for writing all of our contracts and creating all of our proposals. A process that used to take us hours took us 2 minutes on a call. You could just hit a button, it would generate everything and send it out, and it helped us close a lot more deals that way. So we're like, this is cool. And part of joining their
what was it called? What was the name of the software?
PandaDoc.
Yeah, we use that too. That's what I thought you said. So yeah, it's really cool.
Super cool. So we were one of their first couple partners. And long story short, we shot them a laundry list of how to do a partner program of things that we would want to see as one of their partners. And they were like, that's a great list. Do you guys want to implement it? And so we actually wind up joining them as directors of the partner program, and led their partner channel for about a year. And that was really cool. Moved from North Carolina to San Francisco, pretty big change. And did that. So that was part of it. During that time, we had done all these process docs, all these things to run the agency. And so we elevated prematurely, but we elevated our current staff at the agency to run the agency. And so
I've done that, made that same mistake probably 3 or 4 times.
Okay, good. I'm not alone. So long story short, 9 months they ran it. And from a revenue perspective, it was making more money than it ever made, because we had pre-sold all these contracts before we left, all this stuff, right? Well, 9 months in, we wind up stepping back into the agency, and it is just totally changed. I mean, the culture is not what it used to be. All of our good talent has already churned, and everybody new is just new and untrained and uneducated. And so, and there was some other things internally we had to deal with, unfortunately, that some of the team members had gotten away with. And so after that, it was like, oh gosh, do we really want to rebuild this? And so we kind of hit the pause button for about 2 years. And I went into consulting. I wound up going into SoftBank and doing some consulting with a couple of their companies. That was a riot. Absolute crazy. I've never seen as many crazy things.
Why?
But,
like what? I don't know that space.
So for those of you who don't know on the call, SoftBank, or listening to this episode, SoftBank raised the biggest fund that's ever existed. It was $100 billion fund. And they just sprayed cash on a ton of companies. So WeWork, the rise and fall of WeWork,
got it.
All that was all part of it. So the spending was just on another level. And it was fun because you could tear stuff up and actually do things, things that were like, hey, it'd be cool to do a couple of videos, turned into like wouldn't it be cool to just launch our own Netflix show? Because you had that kind of budgets, it was like those kind of discussions. But but at the same time, it just it just wasn't fulfilling because you couldn't really impact as much change as you can in smaller organizations that are way more lean and frankly growth driven, not fundraising driven, which are two different. Unfortunately, they're not always aligned.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you went there, you did that for a little bit. Your agency's on pause. Then what happened after that?
So then one day we realized, oh my gosh, the agency is still making money. So because we had set up all these, because we had written, we had practiced what we preached, we had done all this inbound marketing, all this stuff. Those blog posts we wrote back in the agency's heyday were not just doing well, they kept rising in search and drawing more and more traffic in. And we had set up all this automation because we, again, practice what we preach. So when people would come in interested in something, if they were interested in HubSpot, through Slack and all these other automations, it would pull in a HubSpot rep and say, hey, here's a deal, go get it. And we were just getting deals with other software companies, basically affiliate style, but like a little bit more leveled up than normal affiliate, and getting commissions from it. And those commissions kept adding up to a point where like, this is a salary. Holy crap. This is legit. Like, this is a good salary. And so that's when we realized, you know what, it'd be fun. And that's when I kind of started going, what if I came back at the company and did like Huify 2.0 or using the brand closing culture and launching a little bit more around closing culture. And so that's what I've been working on for the last year and a half.
That's awesome. And so where do you see things going now? Like, what's your team look like? Revenue? Where are you guys going? Like, what's the trajectory look like?
So it's kind of because we were doing so much contract work, it was pretty ebb and flow. It'd be right around, 20 to 40K a month average when there was a client paying for something, and then it would drop off and then go back up. So rebuilding, I gave myself this year to really say, okay, how do I scale it back up to where we're making the money we want to make? And I had set a goal for hitting 20K a month recurring by June. And keep in mind, a lot of the time was spent building a new course. It wasn't building marketing things. It was actually building evergreen assets that I could later build marketing around and sell and everything. Yeah. And so I was able to hit that goal, which is awesome. And then now we're scaling past that. So I'd say by the end of the year, it's to hit around 60K a month is my goal. And
nice.
We're pulling in. So we'll see. It's aggressive, but we've had a pretty good July already. So I'm excited what that looks like. But basically it's all around coaching programs, one-on-one consulting, and courses. So it's a little bit there is some services that we still do. So one of our main services that we'll still do is we rebuild companies' CRMs. So a lot of times at this point, we've been doing CRMs for 10 years. Their CRM's just a mess. And so, they don't even have a CRM, but they have all these different things that they're using kind of like a CRM, and they're just makeshifting it. So we have a service right now where in 3 months, we'll completely rebuild the CRM. Data will be flowing the right way it should be. And companies actually can have visibility in what's going on inside their company, and go from the CRM being a chore and like an obligation to it truly being an actual like tool that's pushing sales and that's actually working for the salespeople.
That's awesome. And then what is how does that work? Like if I wanted to hire you, if I said, man, this sounds really good, I need this for me. Like how would that relationship look and feel?
Yeah. So that's, so that one is still a done for you service. And so basically that looks like, first month is diving in and extracting a ton of data and figuring out where everything's going, figuring out your sales process and how are we reporting on that? Where is the current sales process and what needs to be moved over? Assuming that most of these companies that we work with already have a CRM, usually it's taking
we use Salesforce as an example, but it's like
perfect.
Nobody likes it. The team doesn't like it because it's like trying to move your house with like helicopters. You know what I mean? Like it's like It's just too much. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was riding on a plane recently, and there was a salesperson in front of me on Salesforce, and I was like, oh man, plane Wi-Fi, this will be fun to watch. And every single thing she did took like at least 5 minutes. I mean, you'd click to update one field and she would just wait, and the wheel would spin, and then it would pop up another pop-up, and then she'd click the drop down. And I was just like, dude, this is crazy. So yeah, I mean, obviously we're huge fans of HubSpot. We've moved a lot of companies from Salesforce to HubSpot, but basically, regardless of really the platform, even though I'm very, very biased towards HubSpot, what it looks like is taking the deal stages, taking the way that things are being tracked, and truly analyzing them. Because a lot of times companies just have too much, and so a salesperson is involved. We measure clicks. That's the easiest way to measure how effective something is. Like, how many clicks does it take to do anything? And cutting that down cuts down the time, the admin time that a salesperson has to do in between calls, following up with deals, tracking deals, all that. I think the stat is salespeople spend 30% of their time actually selling. So
I believe it.
That's one that we try to help change and implement. But there's a lot that goes into that. I mean, there's even, you're helping cut down
And then is it just not like a retainer? So is it just like, hey, pay us monthly, or is it like per project, or how does that work?
For that service, it's a set fee project. So it's 3 months. Most companies spend around $60,000, obviously depending on the tools you're using and the complexity, but it's 3 months end to end. If we go over 3 months, that's on us. And, we'll get into everything like billing systems and, what's our contract system look like, our process, our renewal systems. I mean, all of that usually comes out of those conversations, but at the end of it, it's having clear data and a clear understanding of what the data looks like. And usually there's a lot still sitting there. That is
is that where the relationship goes to? Is like, okay, now this is the next project that we're going to work on?
So yeah, great question. We're still, there's a couple different ways it goes. If there's a lot sitting there, because we help companies, build out their sales, build these teams, we have, and this is part of me pulling these chess pieces together, there's a couple key components of that. One is building an outbound SDR team and building it as a measurable, when you're talking like Mr. Inbound here, who's finally evolving into how do you build like a team that's handling inbound and outbound leads. SDR, by the way, is sales development rep. They're the appointment setters. They're the guys that actually book the first meeting and pass it off to a quote unquote closer or an account executive. And so that's the first part. And then also, now that you've got a structured sales process, now that you've got all these things, with some companies, you've gone as far as even building out a self-guided rep onboarding program. So now we can start hiring reps, bring them into the program. They go through it themselves. We don't have to increase admin costs alongside. There's clear measurables at each step, because now we can finally track all that in the CRM and it's reliable. And so that's where it can kind of go from there.
That's awesome. This has been really, really helpful for me. And I think for those that are listening, I think no matter where you're at in your agency stage, we've rebuilt our sales team multiple times now. And every time I always get into even we're doing over $1 million a month in recurring revenue, I still get dragged back in sales, because it's like, okay, that didn't get built right. And it's a lot of that's on me. It's not on the people. A lot of it's on me, because I am the entrepreneur that's like, no, I've said all the things that you said. No, they're different. It's hard, right? And so we're at the point now, we've documented everything. We have everything written out. We have everything broken into stages. And it's just now like what you said about attaching the revenue to it is really spoke to me. Like, that's really important, and being able to solidify that with a value and move that through. We have some of that, but we haven't moved it all the way up the ladder yet into the marketing department. So I think that's huge. Is there anything else that we didn't cover that you think would be valuable to the listeners?
I think the sales process is something that everyone skips over, or at least they think like, yeah, I have it. But really, that was one of the things that cut down when I learned that, because all of my sales were taking 9 months and I couldn't figure out why. And so when I finally structured a clear sales process, 9 months all of a sudden turned into like 45, 60 days. And so, and it was because I didn't know where to take them next. And so I was expecting them to be like, wow, that sounds great. Let's do it. But that never came. And so it was always kind of like, well, what about this? Well, what about this? Well, what about this? Every call was another question or another objection or another thing that I had to go figure out and do for free just to win the business and prove that we were the right fit, you know? And so when I changed that, the whole paradigm switched. So all of a sudden, instead of me getting homework, I was assigning homework to the lead at every step. And they had to do things that would make sure that I knew they were on track. Because even no-shows, as an example, I can now determine whether someone's going to show up for a call or not. If they didn't do the homework, I know they're not going to show up for that call. If they did the homework, they're 100% going to show up for that call, or they're going to tell me if they need to reschedule. So that's really good. Change really is like
that's huge. You know, that homework pivot, that's true in account management as well. So I love the way you broke that down because I never made the connection on the sales side, but I've always just said, you got to make it a little bit, you got to get their involvement, right? You got to get their buy-in, and that means they have to do something. It can't just be no resistance at all. But also on the account management side, I've noticed the same thing for agencies is that you are either going to get beat up as the marketing agency or you're going to beat up their operations. It's going to go one way or the other. And sometimes the marketing company deserves to get beat up, right? And sometimes operation, but that's it. There's never really this neutral place where it's like, yay, we won. And sometimes you get there, but it doesn't stay there for long. It just goes back and forth, back and forth. So giving that homework and saying, hey, here's where your operations is broken and why your marketing's failing. If you can learn to communicate that way, you'll keep accounts for a way longer than if you don't do that.
100%. One more freebie. This is like, this actually helped us win a ton of business. I mean, a ton. So we figured out how to get to the top of the HubSpot directory, which was, it was all getting reviews and getting to the top. And so until they changed the whole ecosystem, whatever, long story, we don't have time. But part of it was we figured out very quickly, okay, we're ranked number 2 out of all the HubSpot agencies in the world. We were that way for about 4 years. I know that every client that wants a top-rated agency is clicking on the top 6. And this is true for you no matter what you're doing. Whether they're doing this on Google or whether they're doing it somewhere else, like they're shopping for agencies if they're in that mindset. So being the first to call them had dramatic effect. And there's this whole study on this, but being able to call them within 5 minutes of them submitting a form increases your close rates by like 1,000x. It's insane.
Yeah. So one of our core values is over communication, and it's hard to scale that, right? It's really hard to scale that. We're fighting it all the time. And one of the things is like for me, is how quickly you respond to me. And I want you to respond to me, and I'm going to respond to you quickly too. I don't leave you unread and all those kind of things. And it's true in everything. Like if you just get back to people, and speed is so crucial. I couldn't agree with you more. I love that takeaway. If people want to learn more about what you offer, how you do it, or they just want to connect with you and get some time with you, how can they do that?
By all means, feel free to check out our website, huify.com, HUIFY.com. You're more than welcome to look me up on any social channel, Josh Harcus, HARCUS. I spend the most time probably on Instagram and LinkedIn, occasionally a little bit on TikTok, but those are probably the main ones that you're more than welcome to connect with me, and I'd love to keep up the conversation.
This is great, Josh. You really helped me personally. I really appreciate it. I'm going to actually stop recording now and actually talk to you offline about some things that cool. I have some ideas around, and I appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge with the audience today.
Happy to be here. It was a blast.